Good evening, creatures of the night, and thanks for tuning in. Before we get into these 6 encounters with werewolves that will make you believe that something supernatural lurks in every shadow, I just wanted to take a second to let you know that my new book, Werewolf Ranch, is getting released on October 30th. It'll be available on Amazon.com, and as soon as it's live, I'll post the link. For now, though, if you haven't read my first novel, The Gryffyn Chronicles, I left a link in the description for that one as well. Go check it out. I think it's a good book. With that being said, let's jump right into some of the scariest werewolf encounters this side of a full moon. And remember, don't miss your chance to scream. I used to walk home through Land Park almost every night after classes at Sac City College. It's not far, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, if I cut straight across by the zoo and past the golf course. December meant it got dark before I even left campus, though. But that night, the weather was good. In fact, it was good the whole week. Cool, crisp, no rain. I'd done that route 100 times. Hell, maybe 1,000 times. I knew which sprinklers to dodge, I knew which lights flickered, I knew which path felt safest when the park was empty. I always carried pepper spray. Not because I was paranoid, just smart. I'd been jumped once in high school, and let's just say it didn't go great for the guy who was trying it. I'm not some scared little thing. I grew up scrapping with boys, usually winning. So yeah, walking home alone at night wasn't a big deal for me. That night was like every other night. Hoodie up, backpack slung, one earbud in, I was half listening to a podcast, half thinking about finals. The city had its usual background noise. Cars rolling along Freeport Boulevard, a train horn somewhere, a dog barking in one of the neighbors' yards. It was all blending together into the hum of normal life. I didn't notice when it started to fade, when the sound of the traffic thinned out, when the breeze died. It got so quiet I could hear my own sneakers scuff the pavement. At first, I thought I just hit a lull between cars, but then I realized it wasn't just quieter. It was like the whole world was empty. It hit me how dead quiet it had gotten. No birds in the trees, no squirrels in the grass, just this weird, heavy stillness. The air felt charged, electrified, like static or something, like before a thunderstorm, only there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My skin prickled, that static buzz you get when something's off but you can't say what. And then I heard something I couldn't really put my finger on. There were these low, short bursts of sound from somewhere off to my right. Grunts or maybe chuffs. Not close, maybe 50 yards out, behind the line of trees that borders the zoo. I stopped walking and pulled out the earbud, squinting into the dark. Nothing moved, but the noise came again. A little deeper this time. Not gonna lie, my first thought, something got out of the zoo. Great. A lion, a tiger, something big enough to make the hair rise on the back of my neck. The idea actually scared me. Not the usual city paranoia, but the real kind that drops right into your stomach. Still though, even that didn't feel right. This wasn't panic or danger. It was that slow building dread you get watching a horror movie and knowing the jump scare's coming. It was like something inside me already knew that I was about to experience something hellish and paranormal, even though my brain hadn't accepted it yet. I told myself I was being stupid. I could already hear how it sounded to my roommate. "Oh no, a lion escaped the zoo and followed you home? Are you sure it wasn't just a really fat squirrel that wanted your snacks?" I forced a laugh, adjusted my bag, and kept walking. The path curved toward the streetlights by the golf course, and I focused on those. Civilization, safety, other people. But the noise followed me. It was like it was pacing me through the trees, hiding in the shadows. I told myself it was nothing, just an animal or my imagination, and I started joking with myself about the final girl. I was actually inner monologuing. Don't trip, don't look back, for God's sake don't say hello, or is someone there? But then, something moved near the edge of the golf course. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. It was tall, upright, walking with this weird, heavy sway. My brain instantly filed it under man in hoodie, probably drunk. I'd seen my share of late-night wanderers in Land Park. People cutting through, folks sleeping rough, nothing new. But this one, there was just something about the way that it moved that didn't sit right with me. The gait was off. It's like the legs weren't working the way normal human legs should. I slowed down, backtracking toward the nearest light post. The farther I got from the dark, the better I figured I'd feel. Except I didn't feel any better, because the thing stopped when I stopped. When I stepped backward, it took a step forward. My heart rate picked up, but I forced myself to keep cool. I didn't want to look like some panicked kid running from the shadows. And I tried to logic it out. Homeless guy, drunk, someone playing creepy dress up? But deep down, something in me was already screaming that this wasn't a person. I couldn't explain it, and still can't explain the feeling to this day. It was like warning bells going off in my head, some primal instinct saying that this wasn't right. It wasn't even about how it looked, not yet. It was about how it felt, like standing too close to something you shouldn't touch. And then, whatever that thing was, stepped into the light, and I knew for certain that it wasn't a man. Not in a costume, not hallucinating. This was something different, something out of this world, something that, until that night, I only saw in nightmares and scary movies. The shoulders and neck were wrong, for starters, like they were one and the same, like the head sat straight on the torso. The legs looked human, yeah, but they bent funny, knees angled just a little wrong. Its fur was patchy and gray, coarse and uneven, like an animal that had been burned or shaved in spots. And the head, it was straight up canine. We were talking big, long snout, wolf ears, muzzle that was wet and shining under the lamp because it had a big black nose. It looked like a friggin' werewolf, straight from a scary movie. When the light hit its eyes, they flared neon green. They were reflecting like a cat's, but brighter and unnatural, like its entire eyes were made out of glow sticks. I froze. I don't know how anybody couldn't. Every instinct screamed that this isn't possible, but it was right there, breathing, staring at me, snarling and sizing me up. And that's when the thought hit. If this was a guy in a costume, it was one hell of a costume, because what I was looking at was real teeth, no zipper, and a monster that was way taller than myself. And then it moved, and any thought of it being a man in a costume went right out the window. 1 second, it was standing under the light watching me. The next, it lunged forward like it had made up its mind. We're talking lightning quick. No human can move like that, especially in some big, bulky Halloween costume. And the sound that came from it? That definitely wasn't human, and wasn't anything a human can even mimic. But then again, it wasn't exactly animal either. It was this deep, chesty snarl that sounded like it vibrated its entire body. At that point, everything went out the window. All rational thought, even the ability to breathe. I just ran. My fight or flight instinct took over, and flight won hands down. It chased me though, running straight up on 2 legs just like a dude, arms swinging back and forth and everything. Except when this thing moved, you could literally see the power that it had. The first few steps I took were all adrenaline and blind panic, but after that thing started chasing me, survival instinct was the only thing making me run. My boots slapped the pavement, my breath hit sharp in my throat, and behind me came the sounds of claws tearing at the ground. This thing was fast. It was running hard. I could hear the foot thudding against the ground. It wasn't just following me, it was coming for me. For that, I'm sure. I could hear it panting and grunting and making these short bursts of sound that sounded like an excited wild animal chasing down prey. I've read a lot about encounters. I don't think this was a dogman because the noises were different. In a lot of them, the dogmen are described as making yipping noises, almost like a wolf or a wild dog. This thing sounded like it came from the depths of hell. My backpack slid off one shoulder, then the other. I let it go, didn't even care. The path curved around the pond, the one near a little bridge, and I took that bridge at a dead sprint. The water reflected splashes of movement behind me, just enough to make me run harder. I cut through the picnic area, past the tables and trash bins, trying to stay near the lamps even though half of them were out. And I doubted that this thing was afraid of the light. Every turn, I could hear it gaining, those heavy 2-leg strides pounding the asphalt and the grass, claws clicking on the concrete. The growl deepened into this low roar, like it was excited and angry all at once. I didn't even have enough breath to scream. All I could do was run. I don't even know how fast I was running. All I know was my legs burned, my lungs burned even more than that. I even tried to joke with myself since then, saying, I never ran faster, even when the campus cops were chasing me for tagging the bathroom. I know it's a stupid survival reflex, and it almost makes me laugh, but looking back on it, I still can't laugh about it to this day. I just know that that was literally the fastest I have ever ran in my entire life. Up ahead, I saw streetlights of the residential area. Civilization. I threw myself toward them, feet barely even keeping up with me. When I got there, a car shot past, horn blaring, missing me by maybe a foot as I crossed. The wind from it nearly spun me around. Maybe the car was honking at me. Maybe it saw what was chasing me. Who knows? Maybe it distracted it long enough to save my life. I tore down the opposite sidewalk, cutting between two houses on the quieter street. It was going towards my friend Kate's house. I knew that I could get there as long as that thing didn't catch me. I could see her porch light glowing. My vision tunneled, just that yellow light ahead. I hit the steps, slammed both fists against the door, shouting her name over and over. Behind me there was silence, but I was so scared that that thing was going to grab me. I turned, gasping, expecting it to be right there, but instead it stood just under the last street lamp by the curb, head tilted slightly, breath fogging up in the cold air. It didn't follow me, it just watched. Then it turned, calm as anything, and trotted back into the park like it was done playing around with me. Honestly, I don't think it wanted to be seen by anyone else. But the scary part is, how did it know that? How did it have that type of awareness? The door opened, and Kate's dad grabbed me by my arm, pulling me inside. I hit the floor, legs shaking so bad I couldn't even stand up anymore. Words came out in pieces. Something chased me. Not human. Teeth. Wolf. I don't know what else I was saying, but I was in hysterics. He looked down at me like I was speaking another language, and Kate ran downstairs asking what the hell was going on. But I knew what I'd seen, and it was still out there, somewhere in the dark, heading back to Land Park like it belonged there. The police showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 cruisers, lights flashing through the front windows and washing the living room in red and blue. I was wrapped in a blanket on the couch, still shaking, trying to keep my breathing steady. Kate sat beside me, wide-eyed, quiet, her dad pacing near the door. One of the officers was young, maybe my age. The other, older, heavier, with the kind of face that said he'd already decided everything before I even opened my mouth. They asked me to start from the beginning. I told them exactly what I saw, where it happened, how tall it was, the fur, the eyes, what it looked like, the way it moved. I left nothing out. The only thing I didn't say was werewolf. The younger cop took a few notes at first, but I could tell he was losing interest halfway through. And then, suddenly his pen just stopped. The older one gave me this look, part smirk, part pity, and said, "You sure it wasn't just a prank? Maybe some guy in a costume trying to scare people? Sounds to me like you saw a werewolf out there, young lady, but as far as I know, werewolves aren't real." That did it. I snapped. I started yelling. A guy in a costume doesn't move like that, and also doesn't have slobber and shit hanging from its mouth. He doesn't growl like something that eats elk for breakfast. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I was so angry. They both just stood there, calm and condescending, like I told them I saw Bigfoot juggling raccoons or something. And the older one finally said, "Look, ma'am, we'll take a report, all right? We'll send a patrol through the park tomorrow. Make sure no one's lurking around, but this sounds like somebody messing around. Just know you're safe now. Don't go back out there." That word, safe, almost made me laugh. I could still hear that thing running behind me. I could hear the sounds it was making when it was charging me. I don't think I'd ever feel safe again. I wanted to argue, to make them believe me, but I could already see how it'd go. The harder I pushed, the crazier I'd sound. So I just nodded and let them finish their little report. After they left, Kate's dad rubbed the back of his neck and said, "The city's full of weirdos, honey. Maybe it really was just a nutcase. A lot of them around here. Maybe it was a prank from the college." I didn't answer, because I knew better. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't a man, and it wasn't out there by accident. It wasn't somebody pulling a prank. I saw a real-life werewolf, and my view of the world would never be the same again. After a while, once I calmed down, Kate's dad drove me home. I didn't say much on the ride. I didn't need to. I couldn't even think of anything to say. He kept the radio low, probably trying not to spook me further, but the silence really just made it worse. Every shadow on the sidewalk, every stretch of trees flashing past the window made my stomach knot up tighter. When I got inside, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, then shut every curtain in the apartment. Luckily, it's on the second floor, so I felt a little bit safer. My roommate was at her boyfriend's, and she'd probably be there all night, so I accepted the fact that I'd be alone. I sat there on the couch for a while, light from my phone bouncing off the walls, too wired to sleep, too scared to sleep. Eventually, I opened the browser on my laptop and started searching. First, werewolf sightings in Sacramento, then Land Park animal escape. Then I stopped being picky and just typed in wolf on 2 legs. What came up didn't help. There were stories, hundreds, not just from here in California, but in Michigan, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Canada, France. People describing the same damn thing. Fur, claws, human legs, wolf head. Some people call it a dogman. Some people say it's a werewolf. Others call it a loup-garou. All sorts of shit. But I knew the word that I would use. Werewolf. Some said it was tied to native curses or government experiments. Then I fell down the rabbit hole of skinwalkers, wendigos, the veil. All of those things that I'd rolled my eyes at before suddenly seemed very real to me. Every story I'd laughed off while scrolling, none of it felt funny anymore. After that, I stopped walking through Land Park. I started getting rides home so I didn't have to go back there. By the next year, I let my lease expire and I finally transferred to Chico State, which was the plan anyway. Different city, new start, but I still can't drive past that park at night. Even years later, my gut knows what my eyes saw. It's been years now, and I still think about that night more than I'd like to admit. I don't really talk about it anymore. People either laugh or start asking the wrong kind of questions. But it's there, every time I see the park or hear something heavy moving in the dark. What keeps me up isn't really what I saw. It's how something like that even got there in the first place. We're talking the middle of Sacramento, one of the biggest cities in California. And not just on the outskirts, in the heart of Sacramento. There's no mountains or wilderness. There's no place to hide around there. It's the suburbs. It's a college. Did it come from the river? Was it living in those old maintenance tunnels they say run under Old Sac? Maybe it had something to do with the zoo that's right there. An animal that wasn't supposed to exist. One they had there and couldn't admit escaped? Who knows? Or maybe it's not an animal at all. Maybe the people online are right. That it's something ancient. Something that slips through when the world thins out for a while. The veil theory, whatever that means. Or maybe people really do turn into werewolves. I have no idea, and I don't want to know. I don't claim to have any answers. All I know is what I saw that night, and what I know is that it was real. Wolves don't walk upright, and it wasn't a man in a costume. Wolves don't stand under streetlights watching you, deciding whether you're food or something to chase for fun. So here's my question. Is there really a werewolf in Sacramento? Before I get into this story, I'd like to point out 2 things to you. 1, this is not the first time I have submitted something to you. Years ago, I told you about the time I saw a large wolf in the forest that I think was a werewolf. 2, I'm not from America, which surprisingly is in contrast to what people often think. I'm from the Netherlands, and due to the kind of mentality I was raised with, I would never have even dared to think about the existence of supernatural creatures here until seeing one myself. Now, more than once. Personally, I've always been on the fence about these kind of things, unsure which stories are legend and superstition, which ones had more truth than fantasy. But the typical Dutch mentality that I've been raised with is that there's nothing more to the world than we've already discovered, at least not in the terms of divine, the paranormal, or the supernatural. At least, that is what I had originally thought, until my first encounter in 2017. But, often as it does, the world tends to show us her truths in one form or another. I was born in Holland, the Midwest of the country, but moved to Brabant in the Middle South at a young age. There's nothing out of the ordinary about my home, but I'm happy to say there's quite a big forest just a few kilometers south of where I live. I've often, and still do, go on long walks and relaxing hikes there. I would often go off trail, occasionally even taking nightly walks in the summer. All illegally, of course, since here we have strict laws that say nobody is allowed to camp, go off trail, or be in the forest at night. Now I often wonder why those rules are in order. Needless to say, I deliberately stayed in the forest until after sunset, secretly risking a fine on more than one occasion. On these times, I'd often wear dark clothes, so that the servicemen and women, or any late-night lurkers, wouldn't spot me. I don't know why I'm addicted to these hikes, especially the nocturnal ones. I guess I've always felt a really strong call of the wild since the first time I went off trail in that summer of 2017. When I'd visit the woods, whether going off trail or not even the time of day would matter. I'd get energetic and excited about it. I would even dare to say that I wanted to go hunting at some point, when I'd seen a deer or a rabbit nearby. Unfortunately, I don't have a license or a weapon, so I'm pretty sure I wouldn't catch anything regardless. But this last sighting was in 2019 at the start of autumn. I went for another night hike in the forest. I had to bring my flashlight since it was a cloudy and rainy day outside. As always, I went there on my mountain bike, chaining it to a pole before setting off into the darkness. Between the trees, I saw the last people walking back to their cars and homes as I headed in the opposite direction. At this point, it was getting completely dark, and when I reached the middle point of the forest, it was blackout. You can call me hippie, I don't mind. Frankly, I would have done so myself if I had read a similar story. But before I get into this actual encounter, I want to remind you of the thing that I encountered in the woods in 2017. January, to be specific. And it's something that looked quite similar, although this time, I got an extremely better view of it. It was that winter that I went out to the forest during the day after a short snow had fallen. I wanted to take photographs of the beautiful snowy landscape. Though I stayed a bit too long and it had gotten dark, I started hurrying back when I heard a loud crunch coming from the bushes, as if something big, perhaps a deer, was running along the trail. The sound was distant at first, but soon grew closer, until I saw a deer speed out of the snow-covered depths of the forest across the path that I was on. But hot on its heels was something else. A huge wolf-like creature, clearly bigger than any regular wolf could get. This one was at least a meter high at the shoulder. It looked sturdier than a timber wolf, with dark, shaggy fur. I could see its teeth and paws, both much larger than a normal wolf's. Now please, note that back in 2017, wolves were only just returning to the Netherlands, mostly roaming the border with Germany, and settling in a national park over 100 kilometers away. There hadn't been any wolves spotted in my area yet, so it was impossible to believe that this was an ordinary wolf. And there was also the look of intelligence that this thing had. When it looked over at me as it was chasing the deer, I understood that this thing recognized what I was, though it didn't care because it was busy hunting down a deer. That time, everything happened so fast. The deer and the wolf crossed the trail within 5 seconds before vanishing into the dark. Still awestruck and unsettled, I went over to look for tracks. It had left claw marks, but no paw prints. There were patches of dirt missing, each as big as my hand with fingers spread open. At that point, I actually did feel frightened. I marched to my bike, unlocked it, and rode away, before I could decide to make me its next meal. That's when I heard a sinister, deep howl echoing from the woods, like a wolf's, but deeper, and extremely haunting. Of course, I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. I had no proof, but I wasn't afraid to go back, not even at night. Wolves don't usually bother humans, and by the time my second encounter had happened, I'd nearly forgotten about the beast that called those woods its home. But now we flash forward to the autumn of 2019. I returned to that exact place for a nightly walk. No camera this time, just a refreshing full moon hike. After half an hour of deep walking into the woods, I sat down on a wooden bench. That's when I heard the faint bleating of a sheep. I would say it was about 300 meters away. It sounded distressed, panicked. I stood up and headed toward the noise. But that's when the smell hit me. It was like something metallic, a strong, coppery scent. I knew it right away. It was the smell of blood. When I found the flock, it was on a small moor not far from where I'd been sitting. When I arrived, the sheep were panicking, trying to escape their pen, and I understood why. Because 2 of them lay dead, throats torn open, deep gashes on their sides, and bite marks on their necks. Around the body were enormous lupine tracks, paw prints and claw marks surrounding the enclosure. It looked like the killer, whatever it was, had chosen its prey carefully before striking. It looked like it had circled the pen multiple times before going in and killing. Most would have found this horrific. I, however, was curious. I followed the tracks, hoping to see what made them, before it found me. As the forest thickened, I turned on my flashlight. The shadows twisted and moved. Then I heard footsteps behind me, a branch snapping. I spun around and caught 2 yellow eyes in the beam of my light, 4 feet off the ground. And then it stepped from the shadows. I think it was the same beast that I'd seen 2.5 years before. It had the same build, the same dark color, blood glistening on its snout. I froze. It stared right at me, calm and calculating. No sign of aggression, no sign of fear, but its size alone terrified me. My instincts screamed to run, but I knew better. If I bolted, this thing would see me as prey. And looking at the enormity of this thing, and the condition of the sheep that I just found, I would be no match for it. So I stood my ground. And then the creature rose onto hind legs. There was no growl, no snarl, just silent dominance. I broadened my shoulders, trying to look as large as I could. This thing was not afraid of me at all. I took in the sight of this thing. Flat-footed, long canine snout, covered in blood. Its hands looked more like hands than paws, with long claws on the ends. There was no tail to this creature, something that I had never noticed in my first encounter. And then its ears perked, as if it was considering attacking me. I shouted, "Get away now!" It flinched, almost surprised by my aggression. Then it growled, dropped back to all fours, and vanished into the foliage. When it was gone, I let out a shaky breath. My body trembled, the cold was finally setting in, and so was the shock of seeing such an enormous creature. And then a distant howl echoed through the trees, just like the first time. It sent a fresh fear through me. It sounded like nothing that this world has to offer. I sprinted back to my bike, pedaled home faster than I ever thought possible, and only then did it hit me. I had stared death right in the face. Was I foolish to stand my ground, or was bravery the only thing that saved my life? Why hadn't it attacked me? Why did it leave? Looking at the sheer size of this creature, it could have destroyed me if it wanted to. I could have been its next meal, and nobody would have ever found me in those deep woods. How could something that big not be caught on camera either, or reported in the news? Were witnesses silenced, laughed at, dismissed? I had more questions than I had answers, and this has bugged me ever since then. I still don't know. But what I do know is since then, there have been more cattle mutilations. There's been strange tracks witnessed by others, and reports of missing sheep. Finally, there's always the fact that this happens during a full moon. Always after a full moon. Always hushed up. Is it true? Are werewolves real? Are the stories that our parents used to tell us, or the movies that we see on TV based on somebody's actual experiences? Do these creatures really exist? I would say yes. I've been back to those woods, but only by day now. Even then, I feel watched and unwelcome. Through my encounters, it led me to the study of Old Dutch and European legends about werewolves. Of course, I had known about them before, but after reading them, I found out a lot more. What I found was chilling. Back in the day, European timberwolves were said to be the boldest and most aggressive in the entire world. Are these what those creatures turn into? Are they a hybrid of people and timberwolves? Or is it something completely supernatural that we can't explain? All I can say is this: no matter how unbelievable it sounds, always give a little trust to the old stories you're told. You may one day find yourself facing something straight out of fantasy, leaving your survival to fate. And if you're ever in the Netherlands, walking in the woods under a full moon, you best hope that howl you hear in the distance is much further away than you think. Good luck, and good night. I didn't start believing in werewolves because of movies or message boards. I believe because one night 4 years ago, the air over the Ohio River Valley felt heavy and close, and something big paced the edge of the light like it was counting our heartbeats. Back when I was 22 and still living close to where I grew up, there were rolling hills, cornfields that break into pockets of hardwood, and the kind of low ponds that mirror the sky on windless days. My brother Michael lived 10 minutes from me. Our two closest friends, Jack and Denny, were next-door neighbors, out on a little road that curves past a dairy and then drops into a patch of woods. Denny's family had the bigger brick place with a wide open living room. That's where we spent most weekends. Jack's house was right down the street. It was smaller, and behind it were a few ponds where we used to fish during the spring. It wasn't weird for us to spend all day outside and then all night in front of a TV. We were outdoor boys and video game people all at the same time. Mud on our boots and Mountain Dew in the cup holders. That afternoon, we were sunk into Denny's couches with a co-op campaign going and an empty case of gas station snacks at our feet. Around 3, I volunteered to make a run for cold drinks, mainly for something to do. The gas station was only a few miles downriver. I grabbed a bag of ice and an armful of cans and came back inside 10 minutes later to find Jack standing by the front door, not playing, just staring out into the yard like he couldn't decide if something was out there or not. I asked him what was wrong, setting the cans on the counter. He didn't look at me right away. He just continued staring out the window. You ever heard of a coyote that sounds like it's trying to be a person, he asked. My brother snorted from the couch. Coyotes always sound weird, dude. This wasn't that, Jack said. It was like halfway between a yelp and somebody screaming. It was out back, right where the trees start. Denny shrugged without looking up from his controller. We get coyotes here all the time. They come up as far as the fence to see if the dogs left anything in their bowls. It just felt like one of those country moments where someone says something, everyone nods, and life keeps going. That's what we did. We cracked open drinks, went back to our game, ordered pizza. Somebody's mom texted a reminder about church. Normal stuff. But then Jack stepped outside after dark to smoke, and that's when the night shifted. At first it was just the dogs. Jenny's two mutts, Daisy and Bosco, going from lazy tail thumps to sharp, ugly barking that echoed off the aluminum barn. I went to the sliding door and pulled it open to ask him if he could call them off, and the smell hit me like a wall. It was wet dog and roadkill deer and the sweetness of a landfill when the wind's wrong, all mashed together, heavy enough to taste. The dog's hackles were up. Jack was already backing toward the door, his cigarette forgotten, eyes doing that fast, unfocused scan you do when your brain wants to find a shape and can't. Did you hear that? Deep, like a growl, he said. It was coming from right past the fence. It's coyotes, Denny said from behind us, but his voice had gone a little tight. They'll spook, but they don't usually come this close. I could feel it in the air, some charge of nervousness, and then something out in the dark made a sound that wasn't yelping. It was low and wet, and bigger than any coyote that I'd ever heard. Big the way a tractor sounds big. Not just the volume, but the weight behind it. Denny swore under his breath, went to the gun cabinet by the stairs and pulled a shotgun and a flashlight out. I'll scare it off. Stay in here, he said. We didn't argue. He disappeared into the yard, beam cutting through the air, and the dogs went wild. I was leaning toward the glass when the yard flashed white and the report of a gunshot rolled back a second later. Then another shot, and another. The way you shoot when you're not aiming so much as trying to make something stop. Denny came through the door breathing hard. Grab a towel. Grab a flashlight, Michael. Now. Something nailed Daisy. What was it? Jack asked. I don't know, but it was big. It looked like a huge coyote or a dog. I only saw it for a second. We followed him to the yard. The smell was worse out there, like the air had been stirred up. Daisy, the bigger dog, was down by the woodpile, whimpering and shivering, fur matted dark along her neck and chest. Bosco was stuffed deep into his plastic kennel, shivering hard enough to rattle the shell. The cows across the road were mooing from the far end of their pasture, all clustered up under the trees like they were trying to make a wall out of each other. We did what we could for Daisy, but she'd need a vet, no question. This was beyond anything that we could do at home. We wrapped what we could wrap and lifted her gently, like you do when you don't know where it hurts. The air felt weird, like a storm coming. Every little noise made all of us look up. And there were sounds out there that I couldn't explain. Weird, low growling, like something was agitated. Look, Michael said, pointing past the barn to where the yard breaks into the trees. He had the flashlight low, and his beam was pressed into the brush. The barking faltered and turned to these low growls, the kind a dog does when it's scared but still trying not to be. And then something moved. Not fast, not even much, just a shift of darker dark within the dark. I'm checking the line, Michael said. If something's out there, it's not walking across the yard like it owns it. Stay together, Jack said. We tried, we really did, but the property sprawls in weird ways. A barn, a garden, wood piles, then fence and creek and a notch of trees where the hills start. Denny went down toward the pasture where the cows were pressed up, and Jack and I went down toward the barn. Michael took the corner along the property line. We weren't exactly out of shouting distance, but we weren't in touching distance either, and that felt wrong. My shoes were thick with mud, and the smell kept finding my throat. Something was out there that was really striking my nerves, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It was just a very eerie feeling. Looking back on it, I think it's the feeling of being hunted. Then, cracks, close together. Michael fired 3 shots, and then another one, like he was stepping and firing at the same time. "Mike!" I shouted. "What is it? What's going on?" His voice came back thinner, like fear was eating it up. "I saw it." "Saw what?" He swallowed. I could hear it, the dry click of a tongue on a throat. "Not a guy. I thought it was at first, the way it moved, but it wasn't." Jack and I met him at the far fence. He'd braced himself against a tree and was shaking so hard the light in his hand ticked little circles across the grass. "It stood up," he said. "I mean, it was already standing up, like a man. But then it stood up full. It was bigger than me, man. The head. Cal, the head looked like a wolf. It had a big muzzle, ears, and a mane here." His hand went down to his own neck. "It was thick, like a lion. It was behind those honeysuckle bushes and just staring at me. It wasn't afraid. Not until I shot at it. Then it moved like it knew what the gun was." Jack put a hand on his shoulder, and Michael flinched before he knew better. "Let's get back inside," he said gently. "Get the dogs. Get Daisy to the vet." We carried Daisy in, locked the door like it was going to do anything, and brought the other dog into the laundry room. While we were taping gauze and trying not to hurt her, Michael said to all of us, "Don't go back out there." That made Denny look up, stopping his taping in the process. "It's just coyotes, man." Michael's mouth flattened. That wasn't a coyote. What was it then? Michael didn't say it right away. In fact, he didn't say anything at all for the longest time. He just watched his own hands, saw how much they were shaking, and it really seemed to upset him. And then finally he said, "I think it was a werewolf." Jack went to open his mouth, probably to argue, but Michael snapped, "Don't laugh. You didn't see it." It startled me. He'd never talked like that before. He was always so steady and calm. But this was different. It was like he was trying to talk about something bigger than the conversation. I didn't laugh. I didn't say I believed him, but I didn't laugh. I just saw the fear on my brother's face and knew that was something that I rarely ever saw. I just kept my focus on Daisy, kept the pressure on the towel, looking to her eyes, making sure that she was still with us. We agreed on the obvious next step. We had to get Daisy to the emergency vet, but that was across town. Michael kept hesitating, looking out the back door like he was expecting something to show itself where the porch light died. Denny told us that he didn't want to leave Bosco there alone. And Michael agreed. He said, "If there's more than one..." Jack interrupted. "We take them both then. We're not leaving anyone's dog as bait, whether it's for a coyote or something else." Everybody agreed. We knew that we needed to get her help, and none of us were brave enough to stay there alone. We moved fast after that, in the way you move when logic says hurry and your body agrees. Danny grabbed his keys, Jack got a towel under Daisy so we could lift her without pulling at her wound. Michael took Bosco's leash and tried to coax him out, but the dog was planted and made himself seem 50 pounds heavier. Then, as we were leaving, the woods spoke. Not words exactly, but something that carried intent. A ragged, furious sound ripped from the tree line. It was wound up through pitch the way that a siren winds up. It broke across the yard at a volume that felt wrong, like it was too big for the throat that made it. Bosco went nuts and lurched so hard that Michael stumbled and caught himself against the doorframe, pulling on the leash so the dog wouldn't run off into the night. "Inside," Jack said, but we were already moving. The next sound came not as a sound, but as a thud. Something big hitting the porch. It was hard enough to rattle the rails and the boards underneath our feet. We looked and saw a rock the size of a softball roll and settle onto the steps. None of us said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. No person could have thrown a rock that big from the tree line. "Car," Denny said, voice gone thin. He bent, scooped Bosco up like he was a sack of feed, and then we hustled, careful with Daisy, half crouched like it would make us smaller targets for whatever was out there in the woods. The porch light made a little pool on the driveway. Beyond it, the darkness pressed in. Rain ticking, cows calling to each other with anxious hollow moos. But that smell and those growls followed us all the way to the car. We piled in, Jack slamming the passenger door, Michael crawling in back with the dogs. Denny threw it into reverse, and then we were out of there. No one said anything at first. The sound the thing made felt stuck in my chest, like my memory was vibrating with fear. Somewhere between the subdivision and the highway, my brother finally spoke, but his voice was tight. It was standing there like a man, you guys. It was a wolf, but it was standing there like a guy. What? It wasn't standing like Daisy does when you get her to dance, like she's hunched over. This thing was standing on its feet like it knew how to walk like that. You could see it in the way it stepped. It wasn't anything that's supposed to be out there. I promise you, what I saw was a werewolf. Okay, Jack said, like he was trying to knock the panic out of his own head. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. Right now, we just gotta get the dog to the vet to make sure that she's okay. After that, we can figure out what the hell is out there. For the rest of the drive, none of us really said much. We just kept silently checking on Daisy. At the emergency vet, the desk clerk didn't even blink at the blood on our sleeves. I guess it's something she sees often, especially out here. Daisy disappeared between swinging doors with techs on both sides of her gurney, and the rest of us collapsed onto plastic chairs with Bosco pressed against Michael's boots. We waited and waited. Denny called his parents and told them enough to make them cautious, not enough to make them tell him that he was making it up, but enough to where they could keep an eye out when they walked into the house. And he kept saying, "I'm sorry," over and over, like he should have been outside with the dogs instead of playing games. Like any of us would have known that this was coming. Jack wasn't talking much. He stared at the door that Daisy had gone through and kept flexing his hands to see if they'd stopped shaking. But Michael couldn't stop talking. Shock does that sometimes. It makes your mouth run ahead of your thoughts. He kept circling back to details, like if he could stack them in a neat pile, we'd believe him. I didn't need much convincing. What I saw on his face, that fear, I was already believing him. Something out there was not normal. He kept talking about the way the shoulders looked under the fur, thick and muscular, the thick mane at the neck, the arms that weren't legs but shaped like human arms, down to the hands and claws, and those yellow eyes that seemed to recognize what the weapon was. He swore that he knew that that thing recognized the gun the moment that he saw it. He swore it had watched him, as if it was more interested in him than getting away. "Did you hit it when you shot?" I asked quietly. "I think so," he said. "It twitched when my second shot went off. Not like pain, but like surprise. It didn't scream. It made a noise like it was angry, the way a person gets angry, not the way an animal yelps." Denny came back from the phone with his shoulders lower. "Dad says they'll be home soon. He'll walk the property with Mike from up the road just in case. He says there's been brave coyotes lately. Rabies, maybe." "Coyotes don't throw rocks," Jack said without looking up. And I could see the look on his face, too. Maybe he was starting to believe my brother's story as well. The hours stretched out. I took half a sleep, where your body shuts down but your brain keeps flinching. And then a tech in scrubs with cartoon animals on them told us that Daisy would be okay. She'd need anesthesia and wound repair, and then definitely antibiotics. They'd keep her overnight, and we were free to go home. None of us wanted to go, but there wasn't anywhere else to go. When we got back, Denny's parents' car was already in the driveway. Inside, they were making coffee, calm in that parental way that pretends calmness can make the world behave. Denny's dad had a neighbor with him, Mike, an old hunter with a beard, and they'd already walked the fence and the creek and the first line of trees. "Nothing," Denny's dad said. "Spot where the dog got hit, but no tracks we could make sense of in the rain. Some scuffs by the barn." And then he shook his head. "These damn coyotes get braver every year." We didn't correct him. There didn't seem to be a point. It's not every day that 4 boys yell werewolf and want everybody to believe them. We slept through the gray part of the morning and woke up in the afternoon. It felt like a different week, honestly. The house was quiet. The cows across the road were scattered and chewing, like cows always do, and the porch was swept clean. The rock was gone. For a while, you could almost believe that nothing happened, but the 4 of us knew the truth. And when we finally walked the yard, just the 4 of us, we did find something. Not proof, not a plastered cast or hair on barbed wire, just a place where the honeysuckle was crushed in that way that suggested weight and intention, and a scuff on the far side of a maple that lined up with where Michael thought a shoulder would have been. Something that was over 6 feet high. It was like the creature was leaning against it. People who weren't there told us it was coyotes. Brave ones, rabid ones maybe, but I don't buy that crap. People were there that moved their mouths and didn't say anything. Those were the people that experienced it. The four of us knew what happened. Daisy healed up. The story, such as it was, started to sound ridiculous even to me when I tried to tell it. But here I am, typing it up to you, hoping that you'll believe me. Certain pieces of it won't go away. I still remember the smell. I remember that howl. I remember the way the cows pulled tight as a coin in a jar. And I remember the wounds on Daisy, like something big had got to her. But most of all, I remember Michael's voice when he said not to laugh at him. I don't know what you'd call it. I don't know really what it was that we saw. Just the glimpses that everybody caught. Some folks would say dogman. Some would say werewolf. If the word makes you roll your eyes, pick a different one. The thing will be the thing whether you name it or not. I saw enough with my own eyes to know there are shapes at the edge of a porch light that don't fit right inside the words that we use for them. Michael swears to this day a werewolf came for us that night, and Daisy bled because she put herself between us and it. I don't argue with it. I'm just grateful if that's what really happened. Michael's not the kind of spook, and I've never heard him get small the way he did when he told us not to go back outside. Danny, of course, still lives there. His parents own that place, so he comes and goes. He hasn't seen anything since, but sometimes if I stop by after dark to visit him when he's in town, we'll stand in the kitchen talking about regular things, and I'll notice the way we both glance towards the glass of the sliding door at the same time. Like the night we're a thing that could put its hands on us and open the handle of a door if it wanted to. But then, we keep talking, because that's how you live in a place like that. You just keep talking and keep going. You ignore some of the things that go bump in the night, and most nights, the things in the dark mind their own business. I'm a 21-year-old woman who lives in a log cabin down a dead-end road in the middle of the countryside. I've lived here my entire life, so this is what I know best. I have about 3 neighbors. This is important, as it'll take place around my closest neighbor's property. I wanted to tell this story because this neighbor has since passed. She was a spitfire Italian woman who drank beer and ate raw garlic with every meal. She passed at the ripe old age of 98 and was the kindest and toughest soul you'd ever meet. For context, I live in southern Illinois, close to the border of Missouri and Kentucky, so you can gauge the landscape I'm surrounded by. You've probably guessed, but I'm bordered in by a large cornfield with my back, and miles of woods spanning to the next town over. I've always enjoyed the scenery around me. It feels tranquil, most of the time. However, this is the countryside. There are bound to be weird occurrences every now and again. One thing I can say confidently is that I have absolutely no explanation for what happened to me when I was 16 years old. I'll start this by saying I've faced many large animals. One time, I was within 10 feet of a black bear in Tennessee. There are old train tracks and shacks that are still in the woods just a mile from my house. The bobcats I've chased out of my driveway are no threat. Same with the coyotes that yelp outside my window most nights. Even the cougar that my dad had to shoot at to scare off the property when I was younger wasn't nearly as scary as this thing. So, I encountered it clearly, and I know what I saw. To paint you a picture leading up to that day, I'll start with what I heard a few days prior. It was the weekend. I remember this because usually my dad would not ask to drive after dark. Most of us don't here, due to the volume of deer and the lack of street lamps, and especially if I had school the next day. I had to drive him to the store, and still do because he has a condition where he can't drive himself anymore. I had begged him to make his famous chili, and he agreed to make it later in the week if he had the groceries. When we arrived home, the sun had just set, and I was grabbing the last few bags out of the trunk when I heard it. This was not a coyote. I've heard every sound they make. Yelping, crying, howling, fighting, whatever it may be. But I can tell you this howl I heard was a singular howl, and it was very deep. Worst of all, it was close. It came from the cornfield behind my house, which starts around 30 feet from where I stood. I shot my head up to look at my dad. He was wide-eyed. Now this is a man who I know not to be afraid of anything that comes near him, but now he had an expression of pure terror on his face. He turned to me and almost ripped the door off its hinges, whisper yelling to me to run inside now. That night, we both sat in the living room in silence. He even changed the TV from his normal Cryptid Center shows to Pawn Stars. We tried to think if there was somehow some wolves in the area passing through, but we came up with nothing. We decided to call it a coy wolf, a coyote-wolf hybrid, and then just forget about it. However, We both knew there was no chance it was this far south without being spotted somewhere, either by hunters, farmers, or just people in town. But fear does play mind games. I'll say I forgot about it a few days. I was focused on my exams coming up in school. I remember this because I had to wake up early to go in and prepare for testing, which is exactly what happened on my last testing day before winter break. It was foggy that morning. I was thinking of going out and feeding the chickens. I pulled my blinds to look at their coop and to see if their solar door had come up yet. Mind you, the sunrise barely touched the tree stumps, and the fog made it even darker out there. I went to put on my coat and was going to see if the elderly neighbor that I'd mentioned earlier had fed her dogs. I figured my barn cats also needed some breakfast, so I headed outside before leaving for school. After feeding and loving on my cats, I headed for the chicken coop, and as I walked around my dad's pole barn, I saw it. It was by my neighbor's pond. At first, I thought it was her, or maybe her fishing gear, or even her lawnmower. I'm telling you, every possible option ran through my mind first, until it began to move. A stray dog would be most plausible, but what stray dog is that huge? It had to have been as big as two beefy Irish wolfhounds stacked on top of each other in a black fur suit. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. I stopped dead in my tracks, hiding behind a stack of wooden pallets behind the pole barn. I've never been struck with this amount of fear before. I didn't even have a weapon nearby. I felt myself fade out for a second before gaining the courage to look again, hoping that it hadn't made its way to me during that time. I peeked out again. I was very sure now at what I was looking at. An extremely large wolf. I'd grown up hearing locals talk about large black dogs sighted in backyards and appearing on chemtrails, but never did I think that I would be one to see it in person. This thing that I was looking at was massive compared to her brick sign on the pond. I was 5'4". My chin would be right at the top of that sign, and the creature was easily almost at the height with just its shoulders. The first part of it I could make out were the higher hind legs. Its back came sloping down to slightly shorter front legs with bulky shoulders. Its muscles were obvious through its fur. This is still the visual ingrained in my memory to this very day. I felt as if it was just waiting for it to turn towards me. The curiosity, along with the fear to identify the creature, gnawed at my mind. I was so pumped with adrenaline I wanted to run, but I wanted to know for sure if it was truly there and not just in my head. After all, it was very early. Maybe I was just tired, I thought. Maybe I was misidentifying something. I started gaining my sense of reality back and realized my neighbor's dog had been barking the entire time. This is a blind and deaf dog, so he knew something, smelled something. He knew that something was there. I guess this was bothersome to that creature. It turned back toward the deepest part of the woods. It lifted its head, and I saw it. I saw the light bounce off its eyes and wet nose. I watched it lick its chops. The fangs on this wolf made my heart sink. It could easily charge me, and if it did, I'd be done for in seconds. Fight or flight finally kicked in at that point, and I hightailed it back to my room. I sat on my floor, staring out the window, watching it become consumed by the trees. I must have sat there waiting for almost an hour, because before long my mom came in to see if I was up for school. I didn't tell her what I saw. Instead, I asked her to check on my neighbor with my dad later that day. Of course, she was confused by that request, but she sent me off to school with a promise that she would. I came home early that day. I ran into the house as fast as I could to be sure that everyone was still there and alive. I remember my dad having a strange look on his face, but he smiled at me after saying my neighbor was okay. He got that strange look back again after my mom left the room and told me there was a coyote carcass by the pond. I told him to point out my window exactly where they found it. He pointed perfectly to where I'd seen that wolf creature. Then I explained everything that I saw out of pure fear, and he looked as if he already knew what I was talking about. I became very paranoid about leaving doors or windows unlocked after that, checking the property at night when everyone was asleep, and I even researched late into the night about what else this thing could have possibly been, but nothing added up. Eventually, as time passed, I forgot about it, but for the most part, it was always kind of in the back of my mind. My dad was always into those cryptid TV shows, and anytime they would mention wolf-like creatures, werewolves or dogmen or anything like that, that memory would resurface. I heard some variations of the same howl a couple of times after that in the passing months, but I was just glad it sounded farther away. Until finally, they stopped completely. Of course, I'm still a bit creeped out to go outside at night, and I've been having recurring nightmares about this creature that I've deemed a werewolf. Some might say it can't be because it didn't stand up. But I believe if it didn't feel eyes on it, it most definitely would have stood up. This thing was much bigger than a wolf. I pushed it to the back of my mind for as long as I could, but eventually, I wanted to share this experience instead of holding it back. My story takes place back in 2011 in a place that I no longer live. I have since moved states even, but not because of this thing. It was due to financial issues, which I won't get into for this. Besides that, it was a beautiful place to live and stay. Maybe that's exactly why this thing was living on the backside of my property, and had been for a very long time. You see, when I purchased an old house on a few acres of land for what you'd call a complete steal, the house itself really needed some work to keep it from falling apart. It was more on the dilapidated side, but I knew a little sweat equity and elbow grease would bring it back to life. The acreage behind it was particularly dead from what they'd done to it before I bought the place. It took me a while to get some change going, working my butt off to make it livable again. Not that it wasn't livable before, but it really needed some work. I got rid of all the broken appliances, fixed up the plumbing in the walls, gave it a much needed paint job, and replaced everything. The washer, dryer, refrigerator, stove, you name it, all gone, all new. The previous owner kept saying, "You're gonna love it, you're gonna love it," but it didn't sit right with me. I could tell he was lying. His main selling point seemed to be the shortcut from the house to the barn and shed. He also kept talking about how he always kept his dogs in there, and they were great guard dogs, but they always acted funny in the barn. Nothing ever came from that conversation, though. Just food for thought. Then the fall came, then winter. I got tired of going out through the snow and ice, so I bought myself a four-wheeler to cut down on the time. It made it faster to get back and forth from work. My job was an hour away from home, but with that four-wheeler, it cut the time down to almost half. Well, that wasn't all he mentioned when he said, "You're gonna love it out here because of the woods." Of course, my story isn't about the property. It's about the thing living on it, and in those woods back behind the house that I was definitely going to love. Turns out, I didn't love them so much once I saw that thing. My place itself sat across from a creek where the deer came by every night once the sun set. Obviously, deers are nocturnal. I could have gotten a great shot at them, but these weren't normal deer. Most of them were white, the same color as my four-wheeler. I thought maybe it was some weird albino gene. I'd never even heard of albino deer before, never seen one until I moved there. Sometimes I'd come home late from work and find dead carcasses along the road, trees torn apart like a massacre had taken place. The sight was grisly. I just figured it was nature doing what nature does. But I want to stress this. These deer weren't just killed. They were obliterated, torn apart, half-eaten, everything everywhere. It looked like they'd exploded, honestly. Of course, I didn't hang around to inspect the scene. I kept going. Then one morning, while driving into town for supplies before work, I saw it. I believe this thing was responsible for what my shed and barn smelled like, and for what was out in the woods. It stepped right out in front of me. I can tell you it was not a man in a costume. This thing, whatever it was, walked on two legs. It had long, shaggy fur that hung from its body, and its most frightening part were the eyes. When it stepped into my headlights, I could see so many things that weren't right. It looked like something had dragged this poor being down into my world, like Frankenstein's monster. It didn't move. It just stood there, looking sickly and starving, showing ribs through its skin. It looked right at me, growled once, and before I could hit it, it dodged out of the way and vanished into the night. I still have no idea what it was. I'd never seen an animal like that in my life. It all happened so quickly in the dark that I can't even give it a perfect description. But I know this much. It wasn't a costume. It was real. Now, I don't know if this has anything to do with the creature on the backside of my property, but I'm going to tell you about that now. So let's fast forward to spring. I was out in my barn one day and kept getting wafts of this wet, putrid dog smell. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I kept watching this patch of a hole near the side of the barn that had been formed from wood rot and time. This was early spring, maybe April. The snow had melted, it was rainy, and the air had turned mild. I finished up for the day, and as it started to get dark, I just didn't feel right. There wasn't enough light left to finish the fencing, so I decided to come back tomorrow, shake off my nerves, and finish once the sun was up again. As I stepped outside the barn, I saw something very large move along the edge. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then it disappeared toward the creek. It startled me because of its size. The sheer mass of it. It wasn't a bear, not in any way, shape, or form. Too big. Bears don't walk upright, casually and comfortably like that. And the way that this thing moved just had a quality to it that was more human than animal. Whatever it was disappeared into the darkness, back toward the creek. That was enough for me. It was days before I went back out there again. Even then, when I did, that awful stench of wet dog and rotting meat hit me again. It was everywhere. No clear source, just this lingering, rancid odor that seemed to move with the air. It happened on and off. I never saw the creature again, but as spring turned into summer, the odor got worse. Stronger, more frequent. It drifted from the barn all the way to my house. Sometimes it reached my porch where I sat with my morning coffee. And that's when I started feeling truly uncomfortable. I knew something was there. And one night, coming home from work, I heard a noise in the barn. Loud, heavy movement. I grabbed my gun and flashlight, walked to the barn, and the moment I opened the doors, the noise stopped. I peeked inside, scanning the shadows with a beam. At first, nothing. Then the beam caught something, and I froze. A deep, guttural growl came from the darkness. I lifted the flashlight, and the beam hit two enormous amber eyes. Whatever it was on the second story, crouched down, waiting. The growl was like that of a lion, deep, bass-heavy, and primal. I nearly dropped the flashlight and bolted for the house, grabbing my rifle and slamming the door behind me. From memory, the head looked like a cross between a lion and a massive wolf. Lots of hair around the neck like a mane. After that night, I never went back into the barn again. I gave up on that project completely. I figured maybe I'd hire someone to finish it. Whatever that thing was, it was coming from the creek to the barn, and I believe it was bedding down there. There's plenty of deer in the area. Easy meals, right? Fortunately, it never came to the house. At least, not that I know of. The next time I saw it was when I went to get my truck from the barn. This time, I took my most powerful flashlight and my revolver on my hip. I was ready. I opened the doors, stepped inside, and immediately heard it again. I jumped in the truck, threw it in gear, and tore out of there as fast as I would go. That truck was my backup work vehicle. I kept it in the barn since winter to protect it from the weather. Now it was June, and I needed it again. But that thing was still living in there. I believe it had been there all along, even before I moved in. It seemed I was the intruder on its home. After that, I stopped going to the barn completely. I gave up that side of the property. That thing could have it. Even in the fall, when I planned to build a tree stand back there, I didn't bother. I figured, fine, whatever this creature is, it can have that land. I'm not competing with it. I'm not that stupid, and I value my life way too much. I believe it was some large, unknown canine predator. Maybe an exceptionally large alpha wolf. I left it alone, abandoned that part of the property, and never went back. Years later, I sold the place to a nice older gentleman who planned on farming. Out of courtesy, I warned him, there's a dog problem here. Something large living up on top of the barn. I never got a good look, but I believe it's vicious. He just smiled and said it wouldn't be a problem. That he had his own way of dealing with nuisances like that. 3 weeks later, I stopped by to drop off paperwork. He was out tilling soil, and I saw multiple bear traps set around the barn and shed. He caught me looking and smirked. Told you, I have a way of dealing with nuisances. Don't let them bother me one bit. And that was pretty much the end of it. Before I finished, I should say, I've heard other sightings in that area. In fact, I've read books written about the region describing creatures that sound exactly like what I saw. One story mentions something called a devil dog, or a hellhound. People describe it as a dog with hooves, or feet like a human. One account told of a man who encountered one of these things in early spring. It came out of a blackberry bramble, attacked him, and took his young son. He described it as having the face of a dog, the body of a bison, walking upright, and completely black. He said it stalked them like it was playing cat and mouse. That encounter happened roughly 10 miles south of where my house was. And it doesn't end there. There are many other encounters across northwestern Wisconsin. Same description, same kind of creature. I'll tell you this. I'm pretty sure your tax dollars paid for a cover-up of this story years ago. Probably before mine ever happened. If you ever become a neighbor to one of these things, don't get in the way. They strike me as intelligent, smart enough to not interfere with humans until the time is right. These things are dangerous, unpredictable, like wolves protecting their young. If you're ever in northwestern Wisconsin, be careful where you walk. And whatever you do, stay out of the woods. I'm a veterinarian for a small town in Ohio. In a place like this, where livestock outnumber people and everyone knows everyone else, you'd think life would be pretty predictable. Mostly, it is. But about 2 years back, I started to notice something that shook my understanding of the natural world. And remember, I grew up dedicated to a life of science. I believe in surgery and medications. But this, it changed the way that I look at things. It all began on a crisp autumn morning. I had just arrived at the clinic when my assistant, Jenny, rushed in with a worried look on her face. "Dr. Rosie," she said, "the Duns just called. Something got into their chicken coop last night. And it's bad." Now you see, this wasn't uncommon. We often dealt with predatory attacks on farms, usually coyotes or the occasional feral dog. But when I arrived at the Dunn farm, I just knew that this was different. Looking at it, I'd never seen any scene quite like that. The chicken coop looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The heavy wire mesh was torn apart like tissue paper. Inside, it was a bloodbath. But what struck me most was the precision of these kills. This wasn't the frenzied attack of a hungry predator. Each chicken had been killed with a single powerful bite to the neck. As I examined the scene, Mr. Dunn approached me, and his voice was shaky. "Rosie," he said, "I've been raising chickens for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. Neither has any of my family. I called my brother to take a look. He's never seen it like this either. What do you think could do something like this?" I looked at him, tried to explain it, but I honestly didn't have a good answer for him. The bite marks were too large for a coyote, and the strength required to rip through that wire, well, it ruled out most local predators. And that precision, it just didn't add up to anything that was around here. I took some samples and measurements, promising that I'd look into it. Over the next few weeks, I nearly forgot about the incident. That is, until it happened again. This time, it was the Peterson sheep. 3 of them, all killed with the same precision that I'd seen at the Dunn's place. Again, the fence had been torn apart with incredible force. It was like whatever was responsible had just grabbed it and ripped it to shreds with its own hands. And the precision, again, animals around here, they just don't make kills like that. So I started keeping a record of the attacks. The locations, the dates, the times. It wasn't until about the 3rd incident that I noticed the pattern. Each attack had occurred on the night of a full moon. Now I know what you're thinking, and don't get me wrong, I think it's crazy too, but here I am just giving you the evidence as I seen it. At first, I myself dismissed it as a coincidence, but as the months went by, the pattern held. Every full moon brought a new attack, always the same characteristics. Incredible strength, precision kills, a preference for livestock over easier wild prey. And every time it got into somebody's coop or pen, the damage was just incredible. So I began to do some research. I looked into local wildlife patterns, consulted with rangers and biologists, but nobody had any explanations that fit. The attacks were too powerful for mountain lions, too precise for bears, too infrequent for any natural predator. And the way that it moved around, avoiding any type of detection, not even leaving footprints, well, it was uncanny. Animals don't act like that. Whatever was out there was taking apart places where animals were supposed to be kept safe. This thing was showing a remarkable amount of intelligence. It was during one of those late-night research sessions that I first stumbled across the term clinical lycanthropy, a psychiatric condition where a person believes they can transform into an animal. Most medical literature dismissed it as delusions, but some older texts linked it directly to the folklore of werewolves. I almost laughed. Werewolves in our little Midwest town? Well, just the idea of werewolves in general was absurd, but especially in our little Midwest town? And yet, I was looking at evidence that was indisputable. The full moon connection, the incredible strength, the animal-like efficiency, but the human intelligence. I couldn't shake the idea once it took root. Of course, I kept these thoughts to myself. I had a reputation to maintain. Still, I started paying more attention to the people around town as the full moon approached. At first, it was subtle. Some folks seemed more on edge as the lunar cycle drew near. One of my clients, a usually calm man named Frank, nearly snapped at me when I suggested rescheduling his dog's appointment that happened to fall on a full moon night. Then there was a woman named Abigail, the new high school biology teacher. She'd moved to town about a year earlier, right around when the attacks began. I noticed she always looked exhausted after full moon nights, often calling in sick the next day. But the real kicker came 6 months into my observations. I was working late at the clinic on a full moon night when I got an emergency call. A large animal had been hit by a car on the outskirts of town. When I arrived at the scene, the driver was visibly shaken. "I swear, doctor, it wasn't a deer. It was something walking on 2 legs," he kept saying. The animal, whatever it was, had dragged itself into the woods. We followed a blood trail, but it disappeared about 100 yards in. What I could find made my blood run cold. There, half hidden in the mud, was a footprint. It was larger than a person's foot, with clear claw marks at the ends of each toe. I made a cast of the footprint before the police arrived. To this day, I keep it locked in my desk drawer. It reminds me that there are things in this world that defy rational explanation. The next day, I heard that Abigail, the biology teacher, had been admitted to the hospital with severe injuries from a hiking accident. She was out of work for weeks. When she was returning, she was walking with a noticeable limp. I wish I could say I solved the mystery, that I uncovered the truth behind these strange events. But the reality is, I'm left with more questions than answers. I know that everybody listening here is going to say I'm crazy or making it up, but I swear on my reputation that everything that I'm telling you is absolutely true. I have no reason to send this story in. But here I am anyway, sharing details with you that seem impossible, but are definitely true nonetheless. The attacks continue. Every time there's a full moon, something happens, always with the same characteristics. Fences broken, animals dead, something big and intelligent moving around without being seen. I've shared my findings with the local sheriff, but without concrete evidence, there's nothing that they can do besides laugh at me. And I can't exactly go public with my suspicions, now can I? Who's going to believe that the veterinarian claiming there's a werewolf in town isn't crazy or on drugs? After all, I could be wrong. There could be something going on that's perfectly explainable that I just haven't thought of yet. I'm still out here doing my job, treating animals, documenting the occasional strange attacks, searching for the right explanation. All the while, I watch the moon wax and wane, wondering what the next full moon might bring. If you're ever in a small town in Ohio and you see a vet truck parked on a lonely back road under a full moon, give a friendly wave. It's probably me keeping watch, waiting for the moment when the world of science and the world of legend finally collide.